Welcome to the Propertybuyer Podcast, where we explore the world of residential and commercial real estate to help you make better decisions about buying, selling, or investing in all types of property. Join me, Rich Harvey, CEO of propertybuyer.com.au and multi-award-winning buyer's advocate. Our podcast features expert interviews, market trends and insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of Australian real estate. Whether you're a home buyer, a seasoned property investor, commercial buyer, developer, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge, strategies and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Well, hello again, Rich Harvey here, CEO of Property Buyer, and welcome to another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast. And today you are in for a real treat. We'll be discussing the inside secrets about property auctions and unpack the mystery of the auction process. Now, with many listening on this podcast, they might have recently missed out at auction. There's been a severe shortage of listings and we're seeing auction clearance rates running around 75 to almost 80% in Sydney. And this clearance level is reminiscent of the boom times that we saw during the COVID period. Now, buying a property at auction can be an emotionally charged process where your adrenaline runs high and your mouth goes dry. You've got your finances ready, you're registered for the auction day, you've got your bidding card, you're all ready, bang, the auctioneer starts the auction and the property's on the market. But then another bidder comes in at a figure close to your maximum bid and you start feeling worried and anxious. You make a bid, but then you get outbid again and you try to maintain that poker face, but your furrowed brow shows the strain on your face and the pressure you feel inside. You make another bid and this process continues toward an unknown outcome. Well, to get the inside scoop on the auction process today, we have one of the best and most awarded auctioneers in Australia today, Damien Cooley, Managing Director of Cooley Auctions. Welcome, Damien.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me today.
Great to have you on the show. Now, we have a bit of a tradition with our podcast. We start with a thought of the week. And the thought of the week this time is from John Lennon, who said, "Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans." What do you take away from that?
Peyton, there's a lot of stuff going on in my life at the moment, so I've been very busy making a lot of plans. So I think it's a pretty fair comment from John, no question. I like what you were saying before about the market sort of reminiscent of COVID times too. 75 to 80% clearance rates, pretty bang on for what's happening right now. There's a lot more buyers registering at auctions. Different situations are playing out, which are reminiscent of kind of more of a boom time market. People often talk about clearance rates. We say that a normal auction market has a clearance rate of 50 to 60%.
Yeah.
A good auction market or good market is 60 to 70%. Strong market 70 to 80, and boom's 80 plus.
Yes,
and we're really getting close to that 80% mark. In fact, some weekends are above 80, but most Saturdays have been around that sort of early to mid-70s.
How many bidders are you seeing at auctions these days? Because during the sort of correction phase, we were seeing 2 or 3. How many are you seeing today?
I think the lowest we got down to was 1.7.
Yeah.
And the highest we got to was over 10. I will also say that when we were achieving more than 10, that was also a time during lockdown periods. And I think some people were probably just registering to watch results rather than registering to actually bid. But we know that in boom time markets we're achieving anywhere around sort of 6 to 8 registered bidders on average per property.
Yeah.
Right now we're hovering around sort of mid-4s to mid-5s on any given weekend.
So let me take you back. Can I ask you, what got you into real estate in the first place? What prompted your interest to get into the property market and auctioneering?
I always loved watching auctioneers. And from a young age, growing up in Rosebery, my dad was a conveyancing solicitor. So, going to an auction on a Saturday wasn't uncommon. But I did go to boarding school, so I didn't have a lot of time to do that anymore. My goal was actually to become a lawyer. Dad was a lawyer, my older brother was a lawyer. That's what I wanted to do, but I didn't make it to law school. I didn't get enough marks in my HSC. I still got over 90, but it wasn't enough to do a straight law degree. Yeah. So I went to uni for a week, dropped out of uni, and I got straight into real estate. And I went through the natural course in those days, property management, leasing. Yeah. And I was watching auctioneers that were conducting the auctions for the company that I worked for, a company called Elders Real Estate, which was run by the Anderson family in Randwick. and that's where it all started. I started Cooley Auctions in 2003, which makes this year actually our 20th year in business.
Awesome, well done. So I've got 2 years on you. I started in 2001. So when I started my business, I was one of the about 5 buyers agents in Sydney when we first started. So
I thought you were the only one in Sydney back in then.
Back in the day, you probably the one made
absolutely.
some noise, but yeah, that's it. But it's interesting to see how the market's matured, isn't it? I mean, particularly with auctions, they weren't as prevalent as they are today. I mean, I don't know what percentage back in the early 2000s of properties were going to auction, but it seems to be obviously in the East almost everything is sold by auction. Lower North Shore, pretty similar. But what percentage of properties would you say are auctioned these days versus not auctioned?
I think it got up to around sort of 40, and more percent of properties that came on the market that were actually auction properties. I don't know the exact number right now. To be fair, it probably feels like that's dropped a little bit in recent times. I think the sexy word off market has really come into play. And a lot of owners have been keen to try and do a deal with a buyer without taking their property to market. I think there's been I think any owner who's thinking about selling has nerves around whether they're going to achieve their price or not. So I guess fishing it out to a few real estate agents, buyers agents, is there someone who's going to pay me an exorbitant amount of money? Sometimes gives them a little bit more comfort rather than full advertising campaign, go to market, all the neighbours come through the home.
So tell me more about how auctioneers think and tick. So I guess the first question is, to be an auctioneer, what do you need and how do you have to be trained to work in your company specifically?
So you need to have a real estate licence. Back in the day, you needed to have an auctioneer's license, and then we moved towards having an auctioneer's accreditation. It's a pretty straightforward process, frankly, to get an accreditation to be an auctioneer. But the licensing has changed a lot in the last couple of years. And in order to hold your Class 1 real estate license and then have an auctioneer's accreditation means it's a lot more difficult for somebody walking off the street that says, hey, I can use my voice, I want to be an auctioneer. Well, you're 2 or 3 years down the track before you're ever going to call an auction.
I mean, it's one thing to get that certificate, that registration, but it's another thing to have that skill that you display week in, week out, where you've just got the pinnacle. But what are those, I guess, those core skills that you've got to have as an auctioneer to be really effective, do you think?
I think, well, what we train auctioneers initially is to be able to present themselves well, to be able to describe a property, know the basics on what the auction is broken down into different elements. Introducing yourself, going through the legals, going through the terms and conditions of auction, describing the property, and then getting into really the meat of the auction, which is the numbers and the final close. So they're the elements of an auction that we train on. I would say the modern day auctioneer, probably led by myself in some respects, I focus a lot less on the legals and the terms. I focus a lot more on the meat of the auction, and that's calling the bids. If you turn up to one of my auctions now and you turned up to one of my auctions 20 years ago, they're very different. Very different in the sense that I don't spend a lot of time talking about the property. I spend a lot more time trying to understand who the buyers are and what I think they're going to pay, and ultimately getting the best out of those buyers.
It's interesting you say that, because I came up against you several times early on in my career, and I think I won a property, I can't remember, down here in the eastern suburbs. It was somewhere in Elizabeth Bay. I got it for a client. They have a really healthy budget, and I remember you squeezing. I was like, "Come on, just hit the bloody hammer! Come on, just finish it up." It was like, but I knew I had it because I had plenty in reserve, right? I think you draw it out so well. But I guess what I was going to say is that auctioneers have a particular talent, and some have it in spades, some don't have it. But I think you've got it particularly well. I was a judge a couple of years ago for the Real Estate Institute auction. I think you might have been on it that year. But we got a 100-point form that we have to rank each auctioneer by. And people don't realise, just as you're saying, the process, it's very complicated. There's actually a lot of components to an auction.
There is. I think from an auctioneer's point of view and from a talent perspective, you can get caught up in, the auctioneer does this or says that. Ultimately, and I think this is really evident in real estate industry, you're either likeable or you're not. And you either engage well with people or you don't. So I often say to agents when they missed out on business, I said, mate, the owner just didn't like you. Or if I don't engage well with a buyer, they just didn't like me. So if I engage well with the buyer and they like me, it's about winning their trust in some respects. And it's about being able to influence their decisions that they make. Now, every buyer goes to an auction with a budget. Some of them go with no budget, but most buyers go with a budget. And that budget, my job is to try and find out what that budget is and try and get them to exceed that budget. Because our role as the auctioneer is to get as much as we can for the owner and do it in the most respectful way that we can to the buyer. I make no apology for making decisions during the auction, and that might be to only take $50,000 bids rather than a $25,000 bid or a $10,000 bid. Just last night, I had an auction that we sold for $1,470,000, and we got to 1.4. I had a written reserve of 1.45, and I know that we had a buyer there that had made an offer of 1,450,000, and there would look like that there were two buyers, maybe a third left, and one we were going in $25,000 bids, and a lady said 5,000. Now I said no, and they got quite upset the fact that I didn't take the 5,000. But my strategy was that I knew that if I could get her to go to 25, I'd get the other buyer to go to 450, which was what they offered before the auction. Turns out she didn't, and another buyer actually did bid 1,425. But there's always if I'm saying no, there's a reason, and the reason in my head usually revolves around trying to get more, obviously more for the owner, but the strategy around, well, if they do that and then that person does that, that's going to get me to that result.
Fantastic. Really good insights. Another question for you is, do you believe that auctions are the best way to sell a property? And why would you say that?
I think I'd be shot if I said no.
It's a pretty set you up for success in that answer.
But I guess really what it boils down to is what's the most effective way to sell a home? And I believe that auction is the most effective way to sell a home. I believe it's the most transparent way to sell a home or any property. And I also believe that it's the fairest way to determine what a property is worth for the buyer and for the owner. Now, some argue that when you have a highest bidder, doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the best out of that buyer, because they might have a lot more in reserves and they potentially might pay a lot more. Well, my thought is, that's the agent's role and the auctioneer's role to try and work that out. And if that is the case, negotiate with them after the auction. Just because it's an auction doesn't mean it has to sell it on auction day. You've got 3 chances of selling it: before the auction, at the auction, and after the auction. We often advise owners to pass a property in and negotiate after, even if we think that the owner will sell for that price. But if we feel that the buyer's going to pay more, and that's our job, is to get as much as we can, then we'll advise the owner to pass it in.
Take the pressure off, do it afterwards.
Do it after. However, sometimes we need the pressure on to get the owner to say yes.
Gotcha.
And we need the pressure on for the buyer to say yes. Again, last night we had a perfect example of this. We had a property that had a reserve of $5.1 million. We were at $4,880,000, and we were able to get a buyer to bid to $4,950,000. Now, the owner didn't want to sell. They had a reserve of 5.1. The buyer wasn't going to pay another $1, and the auction went for about 40 minutes, which is a really long time for an auction us. But it was really about helping the owner understand that this was the best price that we're going to get for the home. And that if we did pass it in my view, the deal definitely would not have come together. And I don't believe the buyer they wouldn't have paid any more. I believe the buyer would have walked away. And even, I know today that buyer has a little bit of far out, I think I've paid too much.
Stretch themselves.
Maybe we're going to have to rent the property out. Now, I know that in my heart, that was the right decision. So for me, auction doesn't just get the best out of the buyer, but it also helps an owner understand value. I think anyone who's selling a property off market at the moment, and you would see this more than I would, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people who are selling their properties off market, they want pretty big numbers for them.
Absolutely.
And they need to go to market to see what they're really worth.
I couldn't agree with you more. A lot of owners are uneducated, to be honest, and they haven't been conditioned or educated by what the market will pay. And I think, as you point out, they're expecting a very lofty price, but in reality, borrowing capacity has gone back 33%. So those prices that we saw during COVID are not there today. There's no way they're going to get there. There's so many constrictions on what people can offer.
The only anomaly to the market right now is that top-end real estate's just, I use the words off its head. Some of the prices that are getting achieved is quite extraordinary. But not a lot of that stuff goes to auction. Well, I did have one on Saturday, which was a $35 million. We actually passed it in on a vendor's bid of $35 million. Would have been nice to get it done for an Australian record under the hammer, but it wasn't to be.
One of these days you'll get one. So tell me, how do you approach game day, auction day? What do you do to mentally prepare for Saturdays, Wednesday nights, whatever days that you're doing the majority of your auctions?
Might surprise a lot of people to know that I actually don't do any prep at all. In the early days when I first started auctioning, I used to inspect every property. I used to really understand what it was that I was selling. I think now, because in my busiest year of calling auctions, I did 2,364 auctions in 12 months. That's insane. I've got a lot of volume. Yeah. This year, unfortunately, I'm not anywhere near that. But the volume of auctions that I call means that I get a lot of experience with people. And an auction is about people. Yes, you need to understand the product that it is that you're selling, but I sell in these suburbs every single day. And I try and understand more about the buyer than I do about the property itself. When I'm doing auctions in rooms, in many cases, the first time that I see the address of the property is when I turn the page and I say, okay, this is the property. And I get a good feel for how many bidders are registered from the information that the agent gives me. In terms of preparation for me mentally, I know that if I feel good about myself, I auction really well. If I'm not feeling good, I don't auction as well as I could. So for me, health, fitness, all that stuff has been really imperative through my career. I've had a change in my training lifestyle where before, I've done two Ironmans, multiple marathons, a lot of long distance trail running, 100-kilometre races. I don't do that anymore. I was 62 kilos at my absolute peak running fitness, and now I'm 82 kilos, but I'm in the gym 4 days a week, and I'm doing that style of training. So I'm enjoying that. That's great. And that keeps me, my health very alert.
That's great. Yeah, you got to be, as you say, I'm the same. I was in the gym this morning, did a cycle class. I do 25 Ks in 45 minutes and come out sweating. And even this morning, I jumped in my freezing cold pool, did 5 laps and came out shivering, but I feel alive today. It makes me feel alive. Great. Feels great.
If you feel good about yourself, I find everything else seems to fall into place.
People around you pick up that energy. You've got great energy at auctions, Damien. You've got great energy. And I think it's amazing to watch you go through multiple auctions. You do 10 in a row, and it's like you've still got pretty much the same energy on the last auction as you did at the very first one. So hats off to you for doing that.
I'm glad that people feel that. I certainly don't.
You're feeling mentally fatigued at the end of it. But
mentally drawn.
Yeah, no, it's good, yeah. So I guess another question, just back to, the state of the Sydney property market at the moment. How would you describe the Sydney property market right now? We're recording this here in June 2023. How would you describe the market right now?
Market's in a really good position, has been for a couple of months. Whether that's going to continue or not remains to be seen. I think that there are a lot of people who are a bit nervous about what spring looks like with interest rates continuing to rise. I think the conversation that interest rates were potentially stabilising and maybe even coming back sort of gave people a bit more confidence to step in and buy. You rightly said a moment ago that people's ability to borrow is changing, and I think there are a lot of buyers that might have their finance due to expire in August or September, and they have to go back and reapply. It's not that they won't obtain finance, but their capacity to borrow might change. And as that changes, it will put pressure on prices. I do believe that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as it stands right at the moment, Rich, we're averaging around 5 bidders, 4.5 to 5.5.
It's good numbers
on any given weekend. It's really good. Yeah. Clearance rates are strong. And that's largely driven by the fact that there genuinely is a genuine lack of property on the market. To give you an example, last financial year, and it was a big year, I understand that. Last financial year, we did just shy of 6,000 auctions for our company. This financial year, we're going to be lucky to crack 3,500.
Wow. Yep.
So it's a big difference in auction volume. It's a big difference between how many properties are on the market.
Well, that's reflected in the core logic figures. Sales volumes are down 30%, total listing volumes are down 26.5%, new listings are down 25%. So all of those stats point to exactly the figures you're talking about there. So that's how I see it. I see the market very much as it's swung during the last 12 months back to a buyer's market, but then it's swung back again to a seller's market simply because of the lack of stock. And that's driving people insane. I mean, in our business as buyer's agents, we get a lot of business because people can't find properties for sale. And we do a lot of transactions off market. We have a lot of expats, a lot of locals moving from interstate, whatever. But the lack of listings is really driving demand for our service at the moment.
Yeah, where is the market going is probably a crystal ball question. But I think if I had something to sell, I would be wanting to get that on the market as quickly as I can. Looking for auction dates in August, September.
Yeah.
I'd start to get a little bit nervous later than that.
Well, I'd agree with you. I mean, I'm helping a lot of clients at the moment do vendor advocacy, where we help the client choose an agent to sell and guide them as to whether they should go to auction or sell private treaty, what the marketing campaign should be. And we're finding, again, same advice I'm giving to our clients, I would go early rather than late, because I think the back end of 2023, we are going to see a lot more motivated selling. I think there'll be a few more listings coming on because people are feeling that financial pinch coming off those fixed rates. People are really going to feel that in their hip pocket nerve. The other factor that to sort of balance the market is the migration numbers, like 400,000 migrants coming into this country this calendar year, another 300,000 next year, and probably 250, 230 the year after. So that's almost, 1 million people within about a 3.5 year period. Now, where are they going to live? We're not building fast enough to cope with that. So that underpins the market, in my view, Damien, as to where, if you want a crystal ball, that is it, to be honest.
Rental market's strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I think rents will do 10 to 15% this year because, again, lack of rental ability.
Yeah, so that will bring investors in the market. Even though interest rates have gone up and are going up, it will bring investors back into property.
Yeah.
Safe haven. Look, the property market's going up, going down. It's difficult to kind of know when the right time to buy, when the right time to sell is. I guess everyone's motivation is different, and that's really what the most important thing to focus on.
Yeah. So can we turn to a humorous side of auctions? Can I ask you, what's the funniest thing you've ever seen happen at one of your auctions?
Funniest thing that I've ever seen at an auction? I've been racking my brain about, different situations during auctions and how people perform. I've had a lot of people try and disrupt auctions. In some cases, they've been funny. Yeah. Funny in the sense that, they come up with all these different things of how they can do it. Probably one of the weirdest things that I've ever seen at an auction, I thought was quite odd. I was a little bit concerned at first, but I did have a buyer pass out at an auction. Wow. Genuinely fall over and pass out. Came to pretty quickly, got up, continued bidding, and passed out again.
Wow.
But actually passed out.
Wow.
So I had to stop the auction. I'll never forget it. It was in Surrey Hills. And another one of my now clients was bidding for somebody else, and she just showed no mercy. She
kept on going,
kept bidding, but it was quite odd. We got them a glass of water, and it turned out okay.
There you go. Oh, that's hilarious. There you go. Tell me more. How do you read the body language of the bidders? You talk about getting to know the buyers, and that's the most important thing. So how do you actually do that? How do you read the body language and sort of decide, I've done enough, I've got the price to the maximum, I'm going to bring the hammer down? How do you decide that critical point?
Yeah, you said before about stringing it out and squeezing the lemon, for want of a better phrase. I think if there's one thing that I'm probably happily accused of is that, and getting the best, what I feel is the best out of the buyer. Look, my role is to get a buyer bidding. I think one thing that I do really well is I chase the bid rather than wait for the bid. I go after bids. Just because somebody wants to bid 10,000, I'll go after a bid. So I'll go after a 50 or I'll go after 100. I won't just take a bid just because a buyer tells me that's what they want to bid. I'll question them on that, and I'll push back and I'll try for more. When I say I get to know buyers, I don't physically go up and shake their hand and know them by their first name, but I understand from the agent the motivation around why they're buying. If they're a family, if they're a young couple, if it's an individual, if it's an investor, you sell differently to different buyers.
So do you get a briefing before the auction?
Yeah, I have a briefing.
The agent?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the things that I'll talk to an agent about are, what is the reserve? What will the owner sell for? We usually find there's about a 3% buffer between what a reserve is and what they actually will take. Yeah. And that obviously is an average. So some are bang on the money and others are a lot more and some are less. Yeah. We always ask the agent how many buyers they have, why are they buying, who they think their strongest buyers are. I'll get the agent to point the buyers out to me. Where are they in the crowd? So this person, that person, I think that person is the strongest. They're not always right, but it's good to get their insight into that. I'll ask them what they think the buyers will pay. Have they sold anything? Are there any downsizers who are looking to buy? I think one of the strongest buyer pools right now are downsizers, people who, and I guess across the years they've probably always been the strongest buyer pool.
Well, they're not as affected by interest rates, right? Some of them are buying with cash. They're selling up their big family home, and then they can, have a bit left over usually. So
we sold one recently in Little Bay, and the 3 strongest buyers were all downsizers. The lady who ended up buying it sold their property in Clovelly for 3.3 million, and they ended up buying this place in Little Bay for 1.9. So they're banking money, and a couple of extra $100,000 to them is not as significant as somebody who's trading up from a 1-bedroom unit to extend themselves to buy that 2-bedder with outside area, etc. So I try and familiarise myself as much as I can with the pre-auction information, and then I look for little telltale signs of when someone's going to bid. It is quite intuitive. So if somebody's reaching for a bidding card, or if they're watching me, intently, it's a bit more challenging in the auction room, I must say, because you've got multiple buyers registered on multiple properties, and I don't get as much insight. But I can usually pick which buyers are registered for which properties when I start the auction. And my goal is we use things that we call trial closes. A trial close can be first, second, third. So when an auctioneer says first, second, third, most people think they're going to sell it. So that's what we call a trial close. I'll use that trial close to extract a bid from somebody, and I'll look for their reactions. And if there's 2 people, usually one of them gives away a reaction that they're about to bid. Another trial close is I reach for my hammer. I'm always amazed at auctioneers that don't use a gavel. I love using the gavel because it's a tool of trade, and it's a tool that I use to trial close.
It's a great symbol. It's a symbol of authority. It's going to come down at some point.
But I might be 300,000 below the reserve, but I'll make a move to grab my gavel, and I'll grab the hammer and I'll threaten to sell it. But I'm still 300 grand below the reserve. I'm definitely not selling it. But I just use that as a tactic to try and extract a bid. See, I always say to an owner before an auction, the best thing that we can do today is show you what the market's prepared to pay. Ultimately, it's the owner's decision on whether they say yes or whether they say no. But if we can get all of the buyers bidding, it's difficult for the owner to say no, because we've shown the owner what the market is prepared to pay.
And as you said before, it's the most transparent process. People are eyeballing each other. If he's going to offer 1.6, then he might offer 1.7, and I've got to be above that to win it.
Knowing different cultures on how people bid. Knowing if you've got a younger buyer opposed to an older buyer, developers versus first home buyers, everybody bids differently, but there are usually some telltale signs for us. And I think you would agree. You're a very experienced buyer's agent. You've been in the market for a long time. You've seen most things happen. Same for me. I've seen most. I don't think there's probably a situation I haven't seen at an auction. So I know, okay, well, last time that happened, this time this happened. I'm going to play it this way this time and see what happens.
I've got to tell you a funny story. I'll answer my own question, but the funniest thing I'll ever say, I wasn't actually at the auction, but Matt in my team had an auction. And the client was so nervous, so wanted this property, so emotionally invested with this property. So Matt obviously registered on behalf of the client. Client's not allowed to bid because they're not registered. So Matt's bidding away. It gets over the 3 million mark, and the client apparently starts looking and going, "You've got to keep bidding." Like, basically, Matt, you've got to keep bidding. Anyway, so someone bid 3.1, and then the client yells out 3.5, and Matt goes, "What the heck?" And he, quick as a thought, he goes to the auctioneer, "She's not registered. Ignore that bid." Perfect, was the perfect response. But what it did was it set the expectation for everyone else that she's going to go to 3.5 and wipe everyone else out. So anyway, someone else bid 3.2. I think we got it for 3.25. So it actually was a tactic that worked in our favour, but it was the funniest thing. It's never happened again. Right?
I can imagine as an auctioneer, I would have had a field day with that.
Can you imagine?
I would have said, quickly, get it registered.
Get it registered, absolutely.
It's actually a funny thought about registering that they're not allowed to bid. I would argue that they are allowed to bid, but it's just
the timing of the bidding.
No, I would say that they are allowed to bid, but the auctioneer might get fined for taking the bid.
Exactly right.
So technically there shouldn't.
Exactly.
But anyway.
That's funny.
A piece of advice for buyers agents: never take your client to an auction.
No, exactly.
Leave them behind because they do give things away. And that's one of the reasons why somebody employs a buyer's agent is to represent them and buy it for as cheaply as they possibly can.
Exactly.
You want to avoid situations like that.
Absolutely, yeah. So getting onto the advice piece, what advice would you give to potential bidders at an auction? How can they prepare for auction day themselves to think they're going to have a good chance to win?
Yeah, look, a lot of people say, what's the best strategy for bidding at auction?
Yeah.
I'm not sure there is a best strategy, to be frank, because every auction is different. If you're turning up to an auction and there's lots of registered bidders, there's no point in starting the bidding low. Well, we had one last night where we had an opening bid of a number that was a pretty low number, and it just enabled everybody to get involved. If I was a buyer's agent in that situation, I would have come in with a strong offer, and I would have knocked out most, if not all, of the people who were potentially bidding against me. I don't want to make the bid too strong and pay too much. But I want to make it strong enough that it wipes quite a few of them out, but they know that I'm serious. I'm not there to muck around.
Exactly.
I think equally, if there's not many registered bidders, you don't even need to bid straight away. Let somebody else try and start, or let there be that awkward pause, or start the bidding and then stop. Don't be afraid to start and then not bid again, and just observe, watch the body language of other buyers. I think if there's one thing that a lot of buyers don't do, and a tip for buyers to do, is to watch their competition, because the people you're competing against, they do give away a lot, and as an auctioneer, that's what I read. So if you watch the buyers and you can see that, hey, you know what, you might almost be at your budget that you set, and you're not going to bid any more than that, or you might bid a little bit but not much. The other buyer, if they're at their limit, it doesn't have to be the size of the increment that you bid, but what's more important is the speed at which you bid.
Absolutely.
So I would say as you're getting closer towards your limit, you don't have to bid 10,000 or 20,000. You can bid 1,000, but just do it quickly.
Yeah.
And that's the crueling moment for the buyer who takes a long time, procrastinates. Are we going to do it? Are we not going to do it? Okay, 5,000, 1,000. Boom, straight away. That really hurts that buyer, because they turn around, and I see it all the time, they turn around and they say, oh, they really want it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they really want it too. And this auction that I had in Little Bay that I just told you about, it sold for 1.9. An agent was bidding for the downsizer, and he's a friend of mine. And after the auction, it sold for a few hundred over reserve. After the auction, I said, hey, Mark, how much more did you have in your budget? And he goes, not $1. 1.9 was the number.
The limit. There you
that
go.
was the absolute number.
Yep.
If the other buyer went another 1,000,
it
would have really tested them to find out whether they would have come in or not.
I can tell you from experience, I've done hundreds of auctions for clients, and I've been at that point. I've missed many and I've won many, literally with about $5,000 up my sleeve. And I'm not going to give anything away to the auctioneer. You know? I've just, I try to play as best poker face I can and try to keep the client in the car or out of sight as much as possible. But we go in with a particular, generally a strategy prior if we can, but I like you, I read the room. I like to position myself near the auctioneer so I can see the auctioneer and my competitors and see when they're running out of steam.
Yep.
And sometimes I'll kick it off, especially if there's a free bottle of wine to be had. I'll give it to my wife, right? You know, she's got a good collection because I'm not much of a drinker. So I'll give that to her. But I'd like to sit back and see what others do. Sometimes I just want others to feel they've got a chance and then come in with a big $50,000 bid or $100,000 bid, knowing it's well below what I've appraised it at.
Yep.
For me, when I prepare for auctions, I'm looking at what else has sold recently. You know, I give our clients very detailed analysis reports on what the current market value is and where the mood of the market is and where it's heading. So we go in armed with that information. And look, during COVID, some stupid prices were paid. It was 10, 15% over what we thought it was going. It's like ridiculous. Now, all of those properties have come right back. You know, those people have probably got negative equity. So, but we're typically within about a 3% accuracy. You talk about a 3% buffer. Our appraisals are typically as well within a 3% accuracy range. It's quite amazing when people say, Rich, what do you think this is going to go for? I give them a number, and then the hammer comes down. They go, how did you know? I go, it's just my job, right? I need to know. They look as if I'm a mystic or something. It's like, well, that's my job. I'm paid to do that, you know. So, another question for you, I guess, talking about your own experience in property. When do you think is the best time to buy a property?
Yeah, good question. I think you buy when the time's right for you. rather than necessarily when the market's right. Yeah. And I guess this sort of comes back to what are you buying? Are you buying your first home and you saved up your deposit and you want to get in the market? I think the most important thing is just to get into the market. I think if you're looking for a family home, it's working out where you'd like to live, where you want the family home to be, and if the right property comes on the market, then you buy it. I'm not one to really sit back and try and pick markets. Whilst I have an opinion on what I think the market's doing, you buy when you can buy and you sell when you need to sell. I've never been an opportunistic seller. So I've never sold because I thought, the market's flying, we need to sell these and get out of it and we'll wait for it to tank and buy back in. My investment strategy, I'm recently gone through a separation. So we've just sold 4 investment properties. I've just been through, all of them are auctioned, just in case you wanted to know. One sold prior, and we ended up with one buyer on that. And the 3 that went to auction all did reasonably well. One did really well, and the other 2 did reasonably well. So for us, it was like we needed to sell because it was part of our separation. When we bought our first property, we just got married and we wanted to buy a home, so we bought the home. And then we got to the point we had 3 kids and we needed to upgrade and we needed a bigger house. So when we felt like the right property came on, we bought it. I don't think it's a good thing to try and get involved in picking markets. I think you buy when you can, buy when you want to buy. And I would rather pay more for the right house than buy what I thought was a cheap house. And I would rather buy in a good quality suburb in a good quality street than buy something because it's cheap and it's got a great rental return.
We have exactly the same mindset. I always get asked, Rich, can you find me a bargain? I say, sure, I can get you a bargain on the Pacific Highway next to the petrol station, adjacent to the school. No problem. We'll get it for a 15% discount. But it'll always be traded at a discount and you'll go spare with the traffic driving past your door. I say, or I can get you a fair market value in a quality suburb that you're going to be really happy with and will double in value in the next 7 to 10 years. Right? And that's been my philosophy. I agree. I think the best time to buy property is when it suits you, when you can afford it. Like, don't go and buy a property if you can't afford it. I think there's a lot of people over leverage themselves and you've got to make sure you've got a buffer, particularly now with higher interest rates coming on. We're going to have inflation around for a couple of years more, and I think inflation is going to be a pain. So interest rates are going to drop dramatically in the next couple of years again. So I like you. You don't try to time the market, spend time in the market, not timing the market, I think is my advice. And tell me about your own investing activity. Are you a true believer in investment properties? You really enjoy and
I love property. We have a family home. We have a farm down in the Southern Highlands, and we had several investment properties that have now been liquidated. And I've always been a believer in buy something, hold it, and form part of my investment portfolio. I'd only ever previously sold one property, an investment property, and we sold that property because I wanted to take the money out of that and put it into something else. I needed a few $100,000 to do something, which was part of the business. So I sold that property to fund something else, which was a tech play, which was what we developed, a business called Auction Now, which we recently did a JV with Realtair, which is basically online auctions.
Brilliant. So what's been the best piece of investment advice you've ever received?
I'm going to credit my accountant, Mike Dean from PwC, and I can still hear him saying this to me all the time. Pay down your non-deductible debt. Pay down your non-deductible debt. And what I mean by that, or what he means by that is, if you have a principal place of residence and you have a mortgage on that principal place of residence, reduce your debt as much as you can. So continue to pay down that debt. Non-deductible debt, whilst it's good debt still because it's an investment and it's going up in value over time, and you have no capital gains tax issues with principal place of residence, paying down that debt is the best thing, that is the best investment that you can do, I believe. And in many cases, I would say pay down that debt before you even buy something else. But I guess everybody's different, and if you can afford to buy an investment property, it's going to go up in value. I've done very well out of the property market in 20 years. Brilliant, great advice. And last question for you, Damien, before I let you off the hook. Is there any particular strategic or smart tactic you would use at an auction to win? Yeah.
If you're bidding for your own property, you're at an auction, you're up against an auctioneer, what would you do?
Well, some people think by bidding in like weird numbers is a great way to bid. I don't believe that's the case. I believe sometimes I've seen I've seen a buyer once, which I thought was really a genius idea, that they were the highest bidder and they could see the other buyer was about to bid and they just bid against themselves. But it was more of an arrogant move than it was anything else. It strategically was showing the other buyer, look, that's okay, you can take your time, I'll just give the auctioneer another 10. I thought that was a really interesting move. Another thing that I've seen buyers do, which has put me off a little bit, I don't think I've ever mucked it up, but actually reading out the whole number, but making it a different number that's actually lower than what the current bid actually was. Because the auctioneer kind of gets can get muddled up with where they're at, and it actually comes back 30 grand.
Particularly the early ones. That's where it's always very confusing.
Yeah, around those sorts of numbers. Yeah. So you might be at 1,130,000, but you might just say 1,097,000. And you might catch the auctioneer off guard, and they might go back to 1,097,000, for example, 1,090,000. I do believe that the person with the biggest budget really should end up being the buyer. However, I also believe that if you go to an auction against me or yourself, and we have a very similar budget, the professional buyer is going to outplay the non-professional buyer. So my strongest advice to any buyer is get involved in the auction. Agents, you want to have the agent on side. You want to have them on board with you as a purchaser. And an owner will always look favourably, I believe, on those buyers that get involved. Don't be that buyer that sits back and doesn't bid at all and literally doesn't bid at all, just out of either out of spite or out of whatever it is, but just not getting involved. I've always been a believer, get involved. So if I ever go to an auction to bid for someone, which is pretty rare, but if I ever do go to an auction and bid for someone, I'm always the first person to start the bidding, and I get involved, and I'd usually just bid pretty hard.
That's it. I'm the same. I make myself known, loud and proud bids. Wear the shirt, wear the brand. Always, say the number in full, hold the card up.
Yep.
I want to be known, right? Because I'm there to represent the client. I'm unemotional. For me, I've got a limit. I'm going to stick to it.
Yep.
And I'm just going to go, I want to win this auction, and I let everyone know, and the auctioneer. I'll often shake the auctioneer's hand, say, I'll see you at the end, regardless of whether I win it or not. But I say, look, I want to be signing this contract with you in about 15 minutes or sooner, depending how fast we can get this over with till I get to my next appointment. Right?
Yep, absolutely.
So I'm there to win. I'm there to muck around.
Quick auction is a good auction.
Exactly.
There's no doubt.
Yeah. Well, Damien Cooley, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it. And really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Thanks, Damien. And everyone, thanks again for listening for another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast. If you do have a question, we would love to answer it in real time. So please click on the speak pipe and we'll be able to answer that in the next edition. But signing off from now, I'm Rich Harvey. Bye for now. Thanks for being with us on another Property Buyer Podcast. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please click on the speak pipe link and we'll answer this during the next episode. If you're looking to buy a residential or commercial property in the near future and would like to get the added advantage of having a buyer's advocate on your side, then please reach out to my team today and send us your inquiry and we'd be delighted to help. Please visit our website at propertybuyer.com.au where you can stay updated with all my latest market updates, weekly blogs and live suburb profiles to help you make better property decisions. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next Property Buyer Podcast.